Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden with CJ. We're a little bit late today, but hope that's okay with you. Tonight's topic is Intro to Vuex. So let's get right into it. So Vuex is a state management library used with Vue.js. So we're going to get into what exactly is Vuex and the main idea and the main thing being a single source of truth. We may not talk about and go really into depth like why you would use Vuex over like the built-in state management system. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit, but this is mainly just going to be like what are the concepts in Vuex and how do you use it in your Vue.js application. If you're watching live, please say hello in the chat, ask any and all questions, and yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So I have open the Vuex website, and we can take a look at there, like what is Vuex, and you'll typically see the term like state management pattern. In their example here, this is not using Vuex, but it's just a very simple Vue.js application that has some data with count on it, and count starts off as 0, and then you have a very simple template that just shows the current value of count, and then you have a method that will increment the count. So you might have a button that when it's clicked, it calls increment and then the count will go up. So a really basic application. But when we start to think of this and like take a step back from what's happening here, you have this graph. So essentially your state is where all of the data in your application lives. So you could think of this like the data property when you're just building a basic Vue app. But the idea with Vuex is all of the state in your application. For the most part, there are some caveats where you might not put something in the main store, but essentially all of your state for your application gets put in one single place. So if you're using multiple components and you have multiple views and just you have maybe a more complex app, all of your state goes into a single store, a single state object. You then have your template or your view, and that represents the state. So that's pretty much how it already works in Vue.js, right? You have your data property, you have your template that says I'm using these specific properties from state on my template, and whenever any actions are performed, like a click happens or a network request happens, something will then update the state, which will then re-render the view. So this is pretty much how Vue.js works in its simplest terms. And what Vuex allows us to do is essentially take all of the state of our application and put it in one place, take all of the changes to state and put it in one place, take all of the places where we might get access to state and put it in one place, and essentially creates a single source of truth. And really the reason this comes about is because in larger applications where you have lots and lots of components and just like a really complex interaction of components in your app, it can get hard to keep track of where things are stored and when things are changing. And eventually you have just this big mess of components talking in a certain way. And it gets harder to manage. So Vuex is introduced to essentially make it easier to manage data across your entire application. So let's look at a more detailed look at Vuex. And there's some core key terms and core concepts in Vuex. You have your state. This is pretty much synonymous with your data when we're talking about like a Vue component, right? This is where all of the data for, if we're thinking about a single component, it's where all of the data for that component lives. If we're thinking about a to-do app, our state is maybe the current value being typed in the form, maybe the array of to-dos, and then for each to-do, there's a state that is the title of the to-do, and then whether or not that to-do is done. So all of that lives in one place. And then you have your components, which take that data from state and show it in the view. And then something might happen in your component. So you might click a button or some sort of user interaction happens where it will then dispatch an action. And an action can call a backend API, it can do some complex logic, but ultimately, when the action is finished, it makes a commit, which is then a mutation. So mutation seems like a fancy word, but it's really just a way to change state. So to mutate is to change, and a mutation is changing the state. So an action will get fired, it will commit a mutation with some data, basically saying, update this value on state to be this new value. So like you make a network request and you say, update the results array on state to be this new array of results that we just got back from the API. That mutation updates state, then the view knows that it needs to re-render because state has been updated, and then it happens all over again. Right now I'm just saying a bunch of words. We're going to see it in action. We're going to see some actual code examples and what this actually means. But for the most part, this is how it works. So in my list of things here, there are some key terms, key concepts. First thing is state. This is synonymous with the data on your view component. It's great. There are some built-in helpers called MapState that essentially allow you to take the state values from the store and use them inside of your component. There are also getters. Getters are synonymous pretty much with computed properties. Think of it like you have some data and it has like first name and last name properties, but you also want to have a full name property, but full name needs first name and last name. So you might have a getter called full name that uses first name and last name from your state. And there's also a built-in helper called mapGetters that'll essentially let you take the getters from the Vuex store and put them as computed properties on your component. And then there are mutations. So mutations are changes. These are things that are going to be updating your state. And there's a built-in helper called Mutations, where essentially you can pull those mutation functions into your component, and they become methods that you can then use inside of your view. And then lastly, there are actions. Now, the special thing about actions is they can be asynchronous. So typically, any sort of network request will go inside of an action. And there's also this built-in map actions helper that allows us to take actions defined on the store and add them as methods on our component. Now, I've been talking a lot. Let's see some code. So I'm going to build a basic to-do app using Vuex. So you might have seen a to-do app built with just regular Vue.js. I'm going to build a very similar app, but we're going to put everything in the Vuex store instead of inside of our component. And if we have enough time, I will go back and refactor some of the apps that I built in Vuex Stravaganza. So I did a live stream a few weeks ago where I built like 3 different Vue.js apps, and I used just the built-in state. So I want to do this with at least one, so you can kind of see the difference between like a component defined using just the built-in state versus a component defined using Vuex. So when we get towards the end, I'll do that as well. All right, let's get started. I am going to use the Vue CLI 3 to generate an app. However, I've had some issues with it. I need to make sure that I do have the latest version. So you can do @Vue /CLI, I believe. The version I had was 3 beta 6, and I don't know if it's been updated since then. We'll see. We'll find out. Tonight, I am not drinking LaCroix. I am drinking Zing tea. Beta 7 is out. Hopefully they fixed that issue, because I tried to generate an app I was giving a talk the other day and it just totally broke. But let's try. So I should be able to say Vue create, and then we'll say, we'll call this Vuex demo. We get to choose our features. I am just going to include Vuex and linting. That's it. It's going to be a very basic app. There won't be any routing or anything like that. We'll use Airbnb. We'll say lint on save, and I will place all of my configs in the package JSON. Go. Hey Bob, welcome to the chat. Yeah, Pijo in the chat is saying he's had issues with the CLI too. Wish they included a Webpack config like the old CLI. There actually is a way to modify the included Webpack config. You use the whoa, it should be there. Once this app gets generated, there's a file called like vueconfig.js. You can define any like new plugins or any configurations for Webpack, and those actually get merged in. I've only done it once. It seemed to work. And Noah is asking, mustache wax? Yes, yes. It's a little frizzy today. I might need some more, but yes. Here we go. It's happening. All right, so that created this folder of Vuex demo. Let's go in there and let's hope this works. Looks like it worked. Yeah, sweet. Okay. Let me pull this over here. Cool. We have a basic Vue.js application. And let's look at what got generated. So if you've used the old CLI tool, there used to be a lot of stuff in this folder. So there was a folder for all of your build configs and your Webpack configs, and all of your everything was in this folder. But now the new CLI tool actually uses plugins. My break timer, let's take a quick break. Quick stretch. Yeah, so Pijo is saying there's one file to define resolvers, and I believe, actually, it didn't create it for me. It used to. I'm not going to get into like configuring Webpack, but there is a file, I believe it's just called vue.config.js, and yeah, there's not much documentation on it yet, but I think the main idea is they use Webpack merge. So whatever you define in there will get merged in with the default Webpack config. But yeah, right now it's still in beta. There's the documentation isn't the best, so you are gonna have to do a lot of Googling and Stack Overflowing to figure things out. But the interesting thing with the new CLI tool is it's using this Vue CLI service, which essentially is in charge of building, and that's why all of the Webpack config is everything else is hidden from you. But we're not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about Vue.js. So right now it got generated with this basic app.vue. This is pulling in this hello world component. I'm going to make it even simpler than that. We're just going to be working in app.vue, and this is where our to-do app is going to go. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of the component that got pulled in. And now we should just have a basic app. We'll do like an h2 hello Vuex. And now it just says hello Vuex. Awesome. We can look at main.js and see how this gets configured. So we're bringing in Vue from the Vue library. We're bringing in our main app component, and then we're bringing in the store. So when I generated it with Vuex, it got created for us, but it's super bare. We're going to have to fill that stuff out. And then when it creates the Vue instance, you pass in the store. So this is pretty much how your components are going to get access to the Vuex store. Bring it in, add the store on there. Now if we look at store.js, it's super bare. We are importing Vuex from the Vuex library, and then we are creating a new Vuex store. And the store will have state, mutations, actions, and then also any getters if we choose to define those. Okay, so we're going to build a basic to-do app. Let's do this. So for a to-do app, we are going to need a basic form. So let's create a form. Something's weird. Let's get rid of that. This form will have a label that will say new to-do. Actually, before we even get into like creating new to-dos, let's just show some to-dos on the page. So like, let's say I have an unordered list, and then I have a list item, and I want to be able to iterate over my to-dos to show them in the view. So typically you might say like v4 equals to-do in to-dos, and then right here we might display like to-do.title. Okay, but right now there is no data on this component, so this won't actually work. So instead of creating data, I'm actually going to define this on my store. So in store.js, our state is essentially synonymous with data, which you would have had on a component. So here is where I'm going to create my array of to-dos. So to-dos is going to be an array. It's going to have a few to-dos in it. Title here will be learn Vue.js, and done is false. We'll have another to-do that has a title of learn Vuex, and here done will be false. Okay, so single source of truth. In our store, we have state defined with an array of to-dos. Now, how do we get this state inside of our component? This is where we will use the built-in helper called MapState. And essentially what this allows us to do is take data from our state and use it inside of our app, inside of our component. So inside of app.vue, I am going to import MapState from Vuex. So that pulls in that helper that's defined on Vuex. And then I'm not going to define any data here. I'm going to define a computed value. And so computed is just going to be equal to, for now, we will change this in a second. We'll say MapState, and we're just going to pass in to-dos. And essentially what this will do is this gets the to-dos from our state defined in our store, and then now makes them available as a property inside of our component so that we can map over them. I might have to put this in an array. Let's see what happens. Things are broken. Cannot convert undefined or null to an object. Let's see. I believe this has to be put in an array. Essentially, you're telling it all of the properties from state that you want to have access to in your view. And there we go. That did it. Let me remove the center styling just real quick. Cool. So it should do that. So now, we're showing the to-dos on the page, but if we look at our component, we are not defining any data. All of our data is defined in the store. So this is kind of the core concept of Vuex. Essentially, all of your state, all of your methods that you might be defining, anything that's contacting an API, everything is going to go in this one place, and then you use the built-in helpers from Vuex to bring them into your component. Cool. So basic idea, I have some state defined here, and I'm pulling it in. So let's add some other state. Let's add just like the title of the page is hello Vuex. And now if I want to get access to title inside of my component, I'm going to put title inside of this array. And then now I have access to title inside of my component. So here I can just say title. And it should still work the same way, but now that's being brought in from Vuex. If we look at the Vue dev tools, we can look at app. You'll see they're listed as Vuex bindings because these aren't defined on data. These are being pulled in from the store, and their values are defined inside of there. Cool. Pretty basic stuff, but essentially, instead of defining data on your components, you define it in this one place, and then you bring that data in. Cool. That is state. Now, let's write this form and figure out how we're going to integrate the store to actually work with the form. So let's say I have a form, and this form will have a label that is for new to do. And here we'll say new to do, and then there will be an input. The name will be new to do. Won't have a value. And then we'll have a button. This will be a submit button that will say add. And let's see what happens. Cool. So this is now a simple little form, but what I want to be able to do is when I type something in here like learn computed, which is something we haven't covered on this channel, click add, and then I want to be able to add that to the state inside of the store. You'll notice the page refreshed. We will need to add a submit handler and also add prevent default, all that good stuff. But first, usually when you're dealing with an input, you might do something like vModel equals, and then directly put something from your data on there that will update that under the hood. However, we don't want to update something under the hood without using a mutation. So first, before we even do this, I'm going to define a mutation. So inside of my store, let's put on state, let's put this property called new to do. Essentially, this is where we're going to store the state of what the user is typing into the input. Cool. But we also need a mutation. We need basically a function that says update new to do, or let's say like set new to do. Now a mutation will take in the state, and state is exactly equal to this state we have here, but now we can change the properties on it. We're also going to get access to whatever's being passed in. In this case, we're passing in a value. So essentially, when we set new to do on this mutation, we want to say state.newToDo equals value. And this is basically being very explicit about when a change to state is being made. So instead of just directly binding this with vModel and allowing that to update automatically, by creating this mutation, now every time the new to do value is updated, there's going to be a log of it. And I'll show that in a second. Okay, so we have this mutation. Now, let's create a getter. Mainly because, no, we won't have to create a getter. Here's what we do. So now, I want to use vModel on here, but I don't want to bind it directly to state, right? I could technically pull in new to do also from state and then do like a vModel on here and pass in new to do. And technically this will work. We can look at this and let's see, we're getting some errors. Yeah, computed property new to do was assigned, but it has no setter. So we're essentially trying to change a value on this computed property, which should be read only. So we need to make this two-way. So here's what we do. We are going to map state with just title and to-dos. But now our computed properties are going to get a little bit more interesting. So, whoa, what happened? Bring that back. Okay. So now computed is an object. We can use the spread operator to say, okay, map the, we'll take the computed values to get title and to-dos from state and put them on computed. But now we need a custom computed for new to do. And this will have a custom get, which is a function, and a custom set, which is also a function. So whenever we get the value, we want to return the current value from the state. Now inside of here, we can simply do this dot $store. So when you're using Vuex, every single component has access to the store like this. Now, it's usually better practice to use the built-in helper functions like MapState, map getters, map actions, instead of directly accessing the store. However, we still can directly access the store. So when we get new to do, we want to return this.store.state.new to do. So this is just going to retrieve the current value of new to do. Now, whenever we set it is when we actually want to run this mutation, which will update the latest value. And this is where we use something called a commit. So when we set it, we're going to say this.store.commit. And a commit has a name, and it's essentially the name of the mutation that we want to run. So on here, we're going to use set new to do. That's the mutation that we want to run. And we want to pass it in the value that it's being set to. So now, this vModel is bound to new to do. New to do is a computed property. To get the value, we're getting it from state. And to set the value, we're calling the mutation we defined in the Vuex store. So this mutation will actually update it. Then because the way computed works, it knows that the value was updated, so it will then get the latest value. So let's watch this happen. Okay, so now if I say learn React, let's look at the Vue DevTools. If we look at the app itself, new to do now has the value learn React, but there's this other tab on the Vue DevTools, which will show you all of the commits that have happened. So if we click on that, we can see every single change that happened to new to do. So if we look at this very first one, that was when I typed the letter L. And then if we look at this next one, that was when I typed the letter E. And then the next one. So basically every single letter I type is firing off a new mutation, and we're keeping track of that. It's essentially like one really big undo redo list. Like one thing you can do is you can click on this and then click the time travel, and the state of your application will go back to whenever this commit happened. Now, this is really powerful for debugging because you can actually see every single change to your state and go back in time and figure out what was happening when a bug was introduced or something like that. And I could really go back to any point when a mutation happened and go back to that point in time, or it could travel forward and go back to when I typed that whole thing in. If I want to go back in time and stay there, I can commit it, and it basically gets rid of all of the mutations that happened after that. Well, actually, sorry, all the mutations that happened before that. There's a lot to take in, but one of the main ideas here is instead of just directly updating new to do, we're now keeping track of every change that happens to new to do. Okay, it's a lot of stuff. Let it sink in a little bit. I will post the code. You can look at it. But now we are keeping track of what the user is typing into this info box. That's great. So now we want to add this item to the list of to-dos. So first thing, let's get a function to call when the form is submitted. So on this form, we're going to do @submit. We'll do prevent to prevent the default action. And we just want to call add to do. Now, add to do is going to be another mutation. Let's take a quick stretch. And it's a mutation because when we add a to-do, we're changing state. We're changing the array of to-dos to have some new value in it. So let's create a new mutation called add to-do. This is going to take in the state and the, well, technically we don't have to pass in the new to-do because we have access to state, which has that value on there. So for now, I'm just going to log add to-do called. Okay. Now, how do we get access to add to do? There is another built-in thing called map mutations, and this will allow us to put add to do on our methods. So I'm also going to bring in map mutations, and now after computed, we're going to define methods. But methods is just going to be map mutations, and we're going to say we want the add to do mutation. So this is almost like we had just defined add to do on our methods, but we're actually getting that from the Vuex store. So now that we've mapped the mutation, inside of the template here, add to do is being referenced on methods, but it actually points to the mutation that was defined in the store. Cool. So now when this form is submitted, we should at least see console.log add to do called. So let's do a hard refresh. We'll say learn React. We'll click add. Add to do is called, but remember this is a mutation, so we actually see that add to do was called. We can see it. So what should add to do? It's going to mutate the to-dos array. So this is just going to say state.todos.push, and we need to push in a new to-do, which is an object. So it's going to have a title. That is just going to be state.newToDo, and done will initially be false. So we're calling this mutation. This mutation is mutating the array by adding a new value to it, and we're just grabbing the current value of new to do and then putting that in the array, so it should show up on the page. So now we will say learn React. You can see all of the mutations firing, and then when I click add, you can see add to do got called, and you can see that it didn't have a payload because we're using the internal state value, but this mutation pushed into the array, so we automatically saw it show up on the page because this, where are we at? If we go back to the component, this MapState here is on a computed property, so it's still listening for changes on to-dos. So because that mutation changed to-do, now that's being brought back in so we can actually see it on the page. Okay, now we want to clear out the form. I actually don't know if it is best practice or not to commit inside of an existing mutation. Let's look real quick, because basically what I want to do is right after we push into the array, I want to be able to say, actually I think this would be a good case for an action, because I want to push it into the array and then set new to do to be the empty string so that it clears out the form. So here's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to have an action called add to do. And add to do is going to commit. So add to do gets access to the context, which is the store itself, and add to do is going to commit add to do. So this, when you commit, is calling a mutation, and then after that, we're going to commit set new to do to be the empty string. So now, instead of mapping mutations to my methods, I'm actually just going to map actions. And it's going to work in a very similar way. But instead of directly calling the mutation, I'm going to call the action instead. So now in my component, I'm going to use map actions, and then I'm just going to map actions add to do. So now, when the form is submitted, instead of directly calling the add to do mutation, it now calls the action, which takes care of doing two different mutations. First, it adds the current to do to the array. Then it sets new to do to an empty string. So let's see it in action. Pun intended. Learn React, add. And we'll see those commits happen. So the first commit added it to the array, so now it's length 3. We can see on the commit before that, the length of the array was only 2. This commit happened, then the length of the array is 3. And then this next commit happened, which was set new to do, and now new to do is totally empty. Okay. We're doing it. It's great. It's fun. Okay. This is mainly it. We can add some other functionality. So let's maybe add, like, because we're storing for each to do done, let's add a mutation that will set a specific to do to be done. So on our list items here, let's say each to do gets its own little button. Actually, no, we won't do that. We'll do a checkbox. So we'll have an input type is checkbox. And this is where it gets tricky, because we could use a V model here. However, we want to actually call a mutation. We don't want to just directly change to do.done. Let's see it happen though, because I could set this V model and I could make this to do.done. And then let's just do like a style binding. So when the to do is done, we will set a line through the to do title. So let's make a span. Let's grab this, put that in there. And we need a done class. So I'm going to create just a class called done. It will have a text decoration of line through. And when this class is applied to an element, you'll see actually a line through the text. So for that, we can use a class binding. So we use class binding, and we'll say apply the done class when to do.done. Okay. So now we have these nice little checkboxes, and if we check them, it works. However, we are not logging those mutations, right? We want to be able to have a record of every single change to our state. And when we do this, we're actually updating state. If we look back at view, and if we look at our state here, like if we look at this, done is set to true. But in our commits, there's no record of that actually happening. And we want to keep track of everything that happens. So let's figure out how we do that. My thought is to use an action, because we could have an action. Let's call it set to do done. Accepts the context, and then it will also accept the actually the index of the to do. And then we'll need to make a commit that updates the done property of a specific to do. And actually, instead of set to do done, let's say toggle to do done. So if it's true, we set it to true. If it's true, we set it to false. If it's false, we set it to true. And this itself will just do a commit. And typically, actions is where like business logic goes. So instead of just directly committing set new to do, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have two different mutations. We'll have one mutation that says set to do done, and that will take in the state and the to do. Now we'll say in the index. And this will first find the to do. So to do index is going to be, well, no, we already have it. So we'll say state.todos at that index dot done equals true. And then we'll also have another mutation that says set to do not done. Takes the state and the index and then does the opposite. Now this is a bit contrived. I might actually do this sometimes like in one mutation, but it's really just to show how our action will actually have some business logic to determine which commit it should actually make. Okay, so toggle to do done is going to get the index, and we're going to check inside of here. We're going to say, I believe we have access to the state on the context. Let's actually just log it out. Let's say context is here and see everything we have available to us when we toggle the to do done. And so now toggle to do done is an action. So I want to add this as a method. And when this is where it gets tricky, because we can't just have a, so let's do this. So instead of a v model, let's bind the value to be to do dot done. And then when this thing is clicked on is when we'll fire off the action. Toggle to do done. And inside of a v4, we also get access to the index. So we'll do that, and then we'll pass in the index to that action. So now when we click on that, we should get this to log, we should get the context, and then we'll also log the index. Let's just see what is on that context object. So look at the console, we'll click this. So context has several things. So it has commit, which actually allows us to call a mutation. It has getters, so we can get their values, and then it also has state. So what I want to do inside of this action is first get the to-do to see what the current done value is. So I'm going to say to do is going to be context.state.todos at index, and we'll say if to do dot done, then we want to commit set to do not done, because we're flipping it, right, with the index. Else we're going to set to do done. Okay, so when that box gets checked, it's going to call this action, which will then find the to-do in the array. If it's done, it's going to set the mutation, which will update the done property to false. Sorry, it'll flip it. But if it wasn't done, it will then call the mutation, which will set the done property to true. Let's see what happens. So we can look at our view. We can look at all of the commits that happen. We check it, set to do done happened, and you'll notice the line went through. So we are actually updating that internal value. And if I check it again, set to do not done gets called, which then updates the value, and the class binding actually works. But the main reason I split it up like this is because we really want to keep track of every single change to state. We don't want to ever change state without having some mutation run or some action that determines which mutation should run. And now I should be able to add some new things. And I should be able to mark it as done or make these undone. Cool. But remember, because we're logging all of these, I could go back in time, and then we go back to when the state was like that, which is pretty awesome. Okay, I think the last thing I'll do is add a mark all done. So we'll have one button, we can click it, and it'll mark all of the to-dos as done. So right below the form, let's add a button. Say all done. And I think this can just directly call a mutation. So when this thing is clicked, we'll say all done. And then we need to define a mutation that marks everything as done. And essentially, this is just going to do state.todos.forEach to do. we're going to say todo.done is true. And now we need this mutation inside of our component. So right now, map actions is the only thing we have on our methods. If we want to use both map actions and map mutations, we can do this. We can use the spread operator to map the actions. We can use the spread to map the mutations. And the mutation we want is all done. So essentially, this is going to add all done, add to do, and toggle to do done as methods on our component. And we also need to bring in map mutations from Vuex, just like that. So now that should mark everything as done. And one thing, though, is when we, let's take a quick break. You'll notice this checkbox is not getting checked, even though the underlying value is done. And I am curious about that, because if we look in our view, we are toggling the value and we are binding it. Let's see what actually is getting rendered on the page. Maybe it's not value, maybe it's checked. I think that's what it is. So if we start like this and we do all done, there we go, that works. And we can check it and uncheck it still. And we can add more things like learn React, learn Angular, learn Redux, learn Express. And if we click all done, it marks them all as done. And if we look at the commits that happen, all done happened, and it marked all of the to-dos as done. But if we look at the state before that, and actually we can travel back in time to that, we can see that the state here, these objects were done, was not actually true. Okay, this has been a whirlwind tour of all the different built-in utility functions with Vuex, putting everything in a single place, having business logic inside of our actions, and yeah, I honestly feel if this is your first time ever using Vuex, this is a lot to take in. Vuex doesn't necessarily have to be this complex, and I think converting one of our existing apps to use Vuex, you'll see that what I just did here was like using all of the built-in things, and especially like this computed getter setter, which is allowing us to use vModel. These are some of like the more advanced techniques of Vuex. But I hope one of the main things that came across is this idea of single source of truth. So right now, I'm doing all of these things in one single component. But if my application had multiple components and multiple routes, what if all of those different routes and different components wanted to access the same values from the state and perform the same mutations on the state? Now, instead of having to duplicate that logic, everything exists in this one place, so it's a single source of truth, and then I can use these same helpers in any other component and any other route to pull those things in from the store, and now any changes all happen in one place. It's the main idea. Cool. I'm going to save this. I'll push it up to GitHub, and then we will convert the player score counter, and then I believe the second app was a to-do, so we'll convert the player score counter, and we'll also convert the Reddit clone. It'll be cool to see the Reddit clone because the Reddit clone is actually using network requests, and so we'll see that network requests typically go inside of actions, which then commit a mutation when it actually gets the data back from the network request. So let's do that. I have some linter errors. Let's fix that. And actually, I need to disable some things in ESLint. So if you're using the Airbnb config, no param reassign doesn't make sense when you're using Vuex. One thing is that if you're watching this video and you're used to Redux, you might be wondering, why inside of these mutations am I directly mutating state? And the main idea is Vue knows exactly when state changes, so there's no need to return a copy of state or an updated copy of state. You just mutate it. So to have the linter rule that says you shouldn't be mutating parameters doesn't make sense for Vuex, because we actually do want to mutate it because that's the way Vuex works. So in my package.json, I believe I have ESLint config, and I can throw some rules in here. And I want no param reassign to just turn off, so I can set that to 0. Let's look at what other things we're getting fired. No param reassign, no param reassign. Let's turn off comma dangle just because I hate it so much. Zero. Okay. So if I kill my app and restart it, it should pick up those changes to my ESLint config. Now there's, for one, I do need keys on my v4. So I am repeating this list item, so I need to do key, and let's just set that to index. And then arrow parentheses around arrow function. I simply just need to add parentheses like that. Cool, no linter errors. Let's commit it and push it up. One thing about the Vue CLI 3 is it automatically creates a Git folder, but I actually want my Git folder to be the parent, so I'm going to delete the Git folder that got created when I generated this. Cool. I'm going to create a repo on GitHub and push this code up. New. We'll call this intro to Vuex. Okay. We are now on the internet. Cool. I'll throw this link in the description. I'll also throw it in the chat right now so you can take a look. But anyone that is watching, any questions, comments, thoughts about what I have done before I refactor an existing Vue app to use Vuex? That will be fun also because instead of having an app generated with Vuex, you can see how easy it is to just install in an existing app. I'm going to plug in my computer real quick. Okay, I'm going to go into the Vue App Stravaganza. And if you haven't seen this, on my channel a while back, we can look at videos. Loading, there we go. While back, yeah, so 1 month ago, I did the Vue.js Stravaganza. I basically just built 3 apps from scratch using Vue.js. And I'm going to take the very first app we built, which is a simple player score counter, and use Vuex, convert it to use Vuex instead. Cool. What have I? Oh, I think I fixed some things in the Reddit clone. Yeah, I made it so that you could just choose a subreddit. Good enough. Cool. So one thing I'm going to do is just check out a branch on this. Is it -b? So that, sorry, git branch -b Vuex. What? Okay. Is it checkout? So this same repo is on the Coding Garden organization. So if you go to Coding Garden on GitHub, there was the... Oh, actually, this is on my personal GitHub. I'll push it up here as well. But all the changes I make are going to be on this separate branch, so you can kind of compare the two. You can look at without Vuex versus with Vuex. All right, let's open this up. Cool, and we can take a look at the README from before to see what the apps did. So this very first app, Player Score Counter, you have two score counters, one for player 1, one for player 2, and 2 buttons for each. Up will increase the score for player 1, down will decrease the score for player 1, same for player 2. So let's see that in action. Let's go into ScoreCounter. And I believe, yeah, npm run dev. And actually I need to npm install. Yeah, I was totally confused. I think I did git checkout. I don't know what I did. It created the branch without checking it out. And then finally so I created the branch with git branch. Git checkout -b will create the branch and check it out all in one go. Yeah. Okay, so now I should be able to do npm run dev. And cool. So the way this works, I can click up here, I can click up here. They work totally independent. There are 2 different score counters. Cool. Let's turn this into Vuex. So I believe this one was a very simple app. So if we look at it, and we look at our source. Yeah, so this is just pulling in Vue, all that good stuff. So in this app, we're actually going to install Vuex. So in this folder, ScoreCounter, I'll do npm install Vuex. Cool. And now in my source directory, I'm going to create a file called store.js. Cool. This will import first Vue from Vue. Then we'll also import Vuex from Vuex. And the first thing we do is we let Vue know about Vuex. If you say vue.use and pass in Vuex, now Vue knows to essentially inject the store into all of your components. So in the last app, whenever I did this $store, this works because we say vue.use Vuex. So later on, when we pass the store into our Vue instance, it knows how to give the store to each component. Cool. And then this will export default an object that has first state. And now we want to use this store in our Vue instance. So in this file here, we're going to import store from the store file. And we just pass the store as a parameter into our Vue app. Now, if we look at how this thing works, our data here has 2 player objects. You have your player 1 object and your player 2 object. In converting this to Vuex, now this becomes our state. So I'm going to pull this directly out of here and get rid of data on here. So now in the store, our state is that. And now in here, I need access to player 1 and player 2. So this is where we'll use the MapState helper. So I'm going to do import MapState from Vuex. And this will then be a computed property. So we'll say computed is an object. And actually, we can just set it directly equal to MapState. So we can say MapState. And the thing we want is player 1, or player underscore 1, and player underscore 2. Okay, so now we have access to player 1 and player 2 from the store. Let's see what happens. If you look at our dev tools, no errors. However, if I attempt to do this, nothing happens because our methods before were operating on data, but now they're attempting to operate on a computed property, and you cannot update a computed property. So if we look at these two methods we had before, what are those? What are they doing? They are mutating state. So essentially, these two methods are going to get pulled into our store, and we're going to call them mutations instead. Let's take a quick break. So yeah, let's just do that. So we're going to take increase score and decrease score. And now in our store, we have mutations. And those are our mutations. Now, you'll notice we're passing in the specific player. Mutations will take in the state and then some value. Instead of accepting the player, I'm going to accept the player name. Because in one case, the player name will be player 1, and in the other case, the player name will be player 2. So now, to actually get access to this player, we need to grab it off of state. So let's say player is state at player name. So if I pass in player 1, it'll grab player 1. If I pass in player 2, like the string player 2, it'll grab player 2. And then I need to do a similar thing here. Okay. So now I need to pull in those mutations. So I'm going to bring in map mutations. And this is going to become our methods. So we're going to map mutations. The mutations we need are increase score and decrease score. Cool. Now, notice before, when we were calling increase and decrease score, we were passing in the player itself. Now we don't want to do that. Now we want to pass in a string that is the player name, because then the mutation will figure out which player we were talking about and then update that specific player. Now, that broke. Let's see how we did this. Map mutations, increase score, decrease score. Did I spell it wrong? I might have spelled it wrong. Let's double check. So we have our initial state. No Vuex store detected. What? How's it getting the state then? Are you kidding me? Vuex bindings, okay. Might have to kill the app and restart it. Interesting. And if we look at view, the Vuex store is not getting calculated. Super weird because we are actually getting the bindings. Let me double check my setup and then we'll Google this error to figure out what's happening. This one, okay. So the store exports an object. Oh, we're just exporting an object. That's why. We have to actually create an instance of a Vuex store. Silly me. Okay, so new Vuex dot store, I believe. And you pass the object into that. Wow, can't believe I missed that. Let's look at the previous example to make sure I'm doing that right. Capital store. New Vuex capital store. Super interesting how I was able to get the initial state though without doing that. Okay, so now if we go over here, there is a state, and if we go up, increase score. Cool. Increase score. And you'll notice in the mutation we get the payload. So the payload is like the parameter being passed into the function. So increase score for this mutation was, the payload was just the name player1, and then increase score for these mutations was player2. So they're still being defined separately and still working. But now we have a log of every action that happens inside of our application, right? It's really one of the main benefits of using Vuex. Everything happens in one place, and we can keep track of it all. That's the wrong thing. Let's look at this one. So this was a pretty easy conversion. We basically took our methods before and put them on mutations, and we took just totally took our data as is and put it on state. Easy enough. So let's commit this, and then we'll work on the Reddit clone. Cool. So that's that one. Yeah, if I look at the remote, it is there. I'm also going to push this up to Coding Garden. Vue.js app Stravaganza. Wait, does it? Oh, we have to update the origin. Oh, we can just add this as a separate one. Add Coding Garden. So now I have two remotes. I have my personal one on my personal account and the Coding Garden one, but I want to push this up to the Coding Garden one. So git push Coding Garden master. And then we'll check out Vuex and do git push Coding Garden Vuex. Okay, so there should be two branches. Yeah, master branch is the way things were, and if we look at the Vuex branch, we can see the changes that happen to ScoreCounter. So I'll throw that link in the chat. Check it out. All right, last one, we will convert the Reddit clone to use Vuex. All right, and I believe the ScoreCounter was generated with Webpack Simple, and Reddit clone was generated with like the full Webpack. So we're gonna install it in the very same way. Let's go into the Reddit clone. And I believe, yeah, there's not any node modules, so, well, actually, I'll install, yeah, let's install all the node modules. Cool. And then we'll install Vuex. So we have Vuex. Now in our source folder, we'll create a new file. Let's call this store.js. Now, every app I built so far just has a simple file called store. In larger applications, you can start to split up your store into things called modules, where essentially all the like state of different parts of your app can have their own individual Vuex store, and that will keep things manageable. Because in a larger application, you don't want to put absolutely everything in a single place. You still might need some separation, but with modules, you can actually have multiple stores that all get merged together. Okay, so in here, we need to import Vue first. And then we also need to import Vuex. And we say view.use Vuex. And then we export default a new vuex.store with an object that has state that right now is an empty object. Okay. And in main.js, we're going to bring in the store. Add that to our Vue instance. And if we look at app.view, actually this is where we are using some simple routing. Let's just show how this app works real quick. Whoa, linter errors. Cool. So the way this works is there's basically one route, but it uses whatever is in the URL to pull in that specific subreddit. So if we go to r/aw, that pulls in that subreddit. If we go to r/javascript, that'll pull in that subreddit. But the component that we're actually going to hook up to the store is just this subreddit component. I believe, what do we call it? We call it posts, yeah. So let's take a look at this. Now, the state for this application is very simple. It's just an array of posts. So we'll pull out data. That becomes our state in the store here. So, cool. So now the state of the store is just an empty posts array. Now we actually want access to posts on here, so we do need some computed properties. So on here I'll add computed, and we'll need to bring in MapState from Vuex. And computed is going to be MapState with posts. So we want access to posts on our instance. Now there's some other things going on in here. So first let's look at load. So load is making a request to a specific subreddit and then setting data on posts. So this one method here is actually two things. It's an action, which makes the request, and then it's a mutation, which will update posts. So let's make that happen. I'm actually just going to pull this out. And first we'll use the action part of it. So actions is an object, and we'll have this action called load. An action gets access to the context and then any parameters. In this case, the parameter is going to be a subreddit. So the action will do exactly what it's doing here, but now instead of directly setting posts, we want to call a mutation. So let's create our mutations. And let's create a mutation called setPosts. This takes in the state and the posts, and we just say state.posts equals posts. And now, instead of directly setting posts, we'll say context.commit. We're going to commit the setPosts mutation, and we're going to set that with the result from our API request. Okay. Now, notice in multiple places we're calling this.load. Now, essentially, we just need to pull in load from our actions using the map actions helper. Cool. So on our methods, we'll use the spread operator for map actions. We're going to pass in load. And so now we have access to the load action, which will actually make the API request, update the state, and because we are looking at a computed property for post, we should still get the latest value. Now, I think, yeah, all of these other methods make sense to actually leave in this component. Let's take a quick break. Because these are not actually modifying the state in any way. They are just operating on the existing data to update things inside of our view. So like we're formatting the date, and that has to be done for every single date. We are creating a URL so the post can be clicked on, and we just have a simple function that determines whether or not the URL is an image. So let's see if our app still works. Hard refresh r/JavaScript. It works. But let's take a look at the Vuex store. I do have a lot of linter errors. But you'll notice that's there. But if we change the subreddit, so if we go to like r/aw again, set post gets called because when the page loads, so if we look at our component, we actually have a watcher for whenever the params in the URL change. And whenever they change, we're actually going to directly call that action. And this action will make the API request. And then when it gets back the data, it commits a mutation, which then updates the posts, which then gets passed back down. So you'll notice set post gets called with a payload that is the new array of results. There's lots of stuff in there. But essentially, anytime we change the subreddit, so if we go back to like r/rarepuppers, set post gets called again because it has the latest data. When you're working with API requests, this is typically what you do. Your actions will initiate the API requests, and when you finally get back some data, your actions will then commit mutations to update the state. Cool. Cool. I think that's it. I don't think I want to show anything else with Vuex. I will say that if a lot of this seems out of reach for you, if you're totally new to programming and new to JavaScript and new to Vue.js, this is probably overkill for what you're working on. But if you have been working in Vue.js applications, Vuex is like the next logical step. You don't always have to use Vuex, but in larger applications with lots of components, it starts to make a lot more sense, especially when you're dealing with a lot of state and a lot of different actions and changes to state. Okay, I will commit this, push it up. Any last comments, questions, criticisms, concerns, thoughts, anything in the chat before I end tonight's live stream? Yeah. Cool. And so that code is up there as well. We can look at the latest commit. See some of the changes that I made. So remove data, take this stuff that's modifying state and pull that into an action, and pull the store into our Vue instance. And then our store looks nice and neat like that. Yeah, so a comment in the chat from Pijo, PWA tutorial. So PWA is Progressive Web Apps in Vue. That would be great, actually. So they do have a Progressive Web App template and then also a plugin for the new CLI tool. I do want to do a like native, something with Weeks, which is like the React native of Vue. But that's totally aside from PWAs. So like a progressive web app is essentially like an app that works offline, an app that will do things in the background, and essentially almost behave like a native app, but still works inside of the browser. But yeah, that would be really fun to do, absolutely. Any other comments, thoughts in the chat? Yep, that's gone. All the code is pushed up. This was fun. This was lots of fun. I will say, check out coding.garden to see my streaming schedule. I don't have the live stream links up on my channel just yet, but next stream is going to be on Sunday. I'm going to take a break tomorrow and Saturday, but on Sunday I will do morning tea and kind of announce the streams for the rest of the week. I do believe Tony will be back for Newbie Tuesday, but we're going to build some other app. We finished the Craigslist app last time, and we're going to try to pick something that we can do like in under 2 hours so we don't have to split it up. Yeah, so that'll be fun. And yeah, take a look at the channel. I will be posting, and you should, it'll show up on the main page here, upcoming live streams. So look out for it either tomorrow or the day after. All of the live streams for next week will be there, so you can click remind if you want to tune in for those. Yeah, I noticed that. So Pedro in the chat is saying it shows the time is an hour off. I think it's just their time zone conversions, because when you look on this page, it's an hour before when it should be. But if you actually go to the page where the live stream will be, that timing is correct. It says like live stream will start in a few hours. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm pretty sure it's a bug on like the channel pages thing, because we're on Denver time, it's actually daylight savings, and it's like showing, I think it's showing GMT -7 instead of GMT -6. Yeah, I don't think it's my fault because when I create the events, I set them as the times listed here. I will report it to YouTube, actually, because I saw that. I didn't know if it was just me. Cool. If you haven't yet, you can follow me on Twitter. And every time I go live, it automatically tweets at the world, so you can click the link there as well. All right. I think that's all I have for you tonight. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks for participating in the chat. I will see you next time. That's me again.